The red lights flashed across the massive command bridge as Admiral Kestar stared at the holographic display before him. His reptilian hands, covered in dark green scales, gripped the metal railing so hard his claws left scratch marks. The numbers on the screen told a story of complete disaster. Out of 300 star systems that the Galactic Council once protected, only 3 remained free. 3 systems. 3 small points of light in a galaxy now covered in darkness. "Admiral," called out his communications officer, a creature with 6 arms and eyes like black diamonds. "Another message from the outer colonies. They're begging for help, but we have no ships to send." Kestar closed his eyes and felt his throat sac deflate with sadness. For 200 years he had served the Galactic Council, protecting the peaceful alliance of 7 different alien species. The Vorthak like himself, the crystal-bodied hegemony, the 6-armed hexapods, and 4 other races had lived together in harmony. They had built beautiful cities on 1,000 worlds. They had created art, music, and literature that spanned the galaxy. Children of different species played together in parks under alien suns. Now it was all gone. The Voidborn Collective had appeared from the dark space between galaxies like a plague made of metal and hatred. They were not alive in any way the Council understood. They were machines, but machines that could think and learn and adapt. Worst of all, they were machines that wanted only one thing: to consume everything living and turn it into more of themselves. "Show me the tactical report again," Kestar ordered, though he already knew what it would say. The hologram changed to show the last battle at New Thessia. Council ships, beautiful white vessels with energy shields that glowed like soap bubbles, faced off against the dark angular shapes of void-born dreadnoughts. The battle lasted 6 hours. In the first hour, the Council's plasma cannons and particle beam weapons worked perfectly, cutting through enemy ships like hot knives through butter. But then the Voidborn adapted. Their nanobots, tiny machines smaller than bacteria, learned how to absorb energy weapons. The plasma that had been so deadly became harmless. The particle beams that could cut through mountains simply disappeared into the enemy hulls. Within 2 hours, every advantage the Council possessed was gone. By hour 6, another star system fell to the enemy. "Sir," his tactical officer spoke up, her voice shaking. "Long-range sensors are picking up something unusual. There's a fleet approaching from Sector 7739. Kestar's reptilian head turned toward the sensor station. "Reinforcements? From which member world?" "That's just it, sir. The ships don't match any known Council design. The computer is having trouble identifying them. The propulsion signature is primitive." On screen, the view screen flickered and showed a group of ships unlike anything Kestar had ever seen. Where Council vessels were smooth and elegant, these were rough and angular. Where Council ships used clean energy drives that left no exhaust, these ships pushed themselves forward with chemical rockets that left trails of fire. Most shocking of all, their hulls were made of simple metal, not the advanced composites every civilized species had used for thousands of years. "Are those kinetic weapons?" asked the tactical officer, her voice full of disbelief. Kestar studied the strange ships more carefully. Yes, they were armed with weapons that fired solid projectiles instead of energy beams. It was like seeing warriors armed with stone axes in an age of laser rifles. "Sir, they're transmitting on an open channel." "Put them through." The voice that came through the speakers was unlike any in the Council database. It was rough, determined, and spoke Galactic Standard with a heavy accent that made some words hard to understand. "This is Captain Jinwoo of the Earth Defense Force ship Defiance. We have heard of your war with the machine enemy. We request permission to enter your space and fight alongside you." The bridge fell completely silent. Everyone stared at the view screen showing these primitive ships with their obsolete weapons and ancient technology. "Earth Defense Force?" Kestar whispered to his aide. "Check the database." His aide's 6 arms moved quickly over the computer interface. "Species designation, human. Homeworld, Earth, Sector 7739. Classification, pre-stellar civilization recently achieved basic space travel. Technology level, approximately 4,000 years behind current Council standard. 4,000 years behind. These humans were using technology that the Council had abandoned when Kestar's great-grandfather was a hatchling. Their weapons were the kind of thing found in military museums. Their ships would be scrap metal against void-born nanotechnology. "Sir," the communications officer said quietly, "they're requesting an answer." Kestar looked at the display showing his 3 remaining star systems. In the outer system, evacuation ships were loading the last civilians from the colonies. In 12 hours, maybe less, the Voidborn would arrive to finish what they had started. The greatest civilization in galactic history would end not with a battle, but with a slaughter. These humans, with their primitive ships and obsolete weapons, wanted to die alongside them. Grant them passage, Kestar said finally. If they wish to fight and die with honor, that is their choice. Send them coordinates for the Kepler defense line. As the human ships changed course toward the last battlefield, Kestar wondered if they understood what they were flying into. The Voidborn had destroyed fleets armed with weapons that could crack planets. What could 200 primitive ships possibly do against an enemy that had conquered the galaxy? He would soon find out. Captain Jinwoo stood on the bridge of his ship, the Defiance, watching the alien fleet through the main screen. The Council ships were beautiful, he had to admit. They moved like dancers through space, their white hulls glowing with energy shields that sparkled like stars. Everything about them spoke of advanced civilization and thousands of years of scientific progress. His own ship was different. The hull was scratched and dented from countless battles. The engines left trails of burning fuel instead of the clean light drives the aliens used. When he walked through the corridors, he could hear the metal creaking and the air recyclers working hard to keep everyone breathing. "Captain," said Lieutenant Heijin from the weapons station. Her fingers moved over controls that looked ancient compared to the holographic displays on the alien ships. "I've been studying their weapon signatures. They use plasma cannons and particle beams. Our railguns are going to look like toys compared to that." Jinwoo nodded slowly. He had seen the tactical reports his intelligence officers had put together. The enemy they were about to face had already defeated weapons more advanced than anything Earth had ever built. The Voidborn could adapt to energy weapons, learning how to counter them in minutes. "Maybe toys are exactly what we need," he said quietly. On the alien flagship, Admiral Kestar was having his own doubts. His tactical staff had run computer simulations of the coming battle. In every single simulation, the human ships were destroyed within the first 10 minutes of combat. Their weapons were too weak, their armor too thin, their technology too primitive. "Admiral," his aide whispered, "perhaps we should suggest the humans stay back. Use them for evacuation duties or supply runs. They will only get themselves killed if they try to fight." Kestar watched the human formation through his view screen. 200 ships flying in a tight group. He had to respect their courage even if their technology was hopeless. "No," he decided. "They came here to fight. We will let them fight." The Voidborn arrived exactly when the Council's computers predicted they would. They came out of hyperspace like a dark cloud, their black ships seeming to swallow the light of nearby stars. There were thousands of them, from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts bigger than cities. Immediately they began deploying their most feared weapon, the nanobots. Billions of tiny machines, each smaller than a grain of sand, spread out in vast clouds toward the Council defense line. These nanobots could eat through any material, adapt to any weapon, and turn anything they touched into more Voidborn ships. "All Council ships prepare to engage," Admiral Kestar ordered. "Fire at will." The space between the two fleets lit up with energy weapons. Plasma cannons sent streams of superheated gas toward the enemy. Particle beams invisible to the naked eye struck Voidborn hulls and began cutting through their armor. For a few minutes it looked like the Council might actually win. Then the nanobots reached the energy beams. Captain Jinwoo watched in horror as the alien weapons began to fail. The plasma that had been cutting through enemy ships like hot knives simply disappeared, absorbed by the swarms of tiny machines. The particle beams that could destroy mountains became harmless light shows. "The nanobots are adapting," reported Heijin. "They're learning how to counter energy weapons in real time." "Then let's give them something they haven't seen before," Jinwoo said. "All human ships weapons free. Target the big one on the left." The first human weapon to fire was a railgun from the destroyer Incheon. Captain So-young had loaded armor-piercing rounds made of tungsten, a metal so hard it could punch through almost anything. The railgun used magnetic fields to accelerate the round to incredible speed, sending it flying toward a Voidborn cruiser. The nanobots tried to stop it. They swarmed toward the incoming projectile, ready to absorb or deflect it like they had done with the energy weapons. But there was nothing to absorb. No energy to counter. Just a chunk of metal traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. The tungsten round punched through the Voidborn ship's hull like it was made of paper. Secondary explosions rippled along the enemy vessel's length as the projectile destroyed critical systems. The ship began to spin out of control, leaking atmosphere and debris. On the Council flagship, every alien on the bridge stared in shock. "Impossible," breathed the tactical officer. "How did a primitive kinetic weapon penetrate their defenses?" Admiral Kestar watched as more human ships opened fire. Missiles with conventional explosive warheads, bullets fired from chemical-powered guns, even simple rockets that used solid fuel. All of these weapons were thousands of years old by Council standards. And all of them were working. The void-born nanobots, designed to adapt to sophisticated energy weapons and advanced technology, had no programming for dealing with simple physics. A bullet was just a chunk of metal moving fast. There was nothing to learn, nothing to adapt to. It either hit you or it didn't. Commander Minho's cruiser Sol did something that made every alien observer gasp in shock. Instead of firing from long range like civilized beings, he drove his ship straight at a void-born dreadnought. At the last second he fired every missile his ship carried directly into the enemy's hull, then rammed his own vessel into the explosion. Both ships disappeared in a ball of nuclear fire. "These humans," Admiral Kestar whispered, "they fight like maniacs." But they were effective maniacs. For the first time since the war began, void-born ships were being destroyed faster than they could adapt. The enemy formation, which had been advancing steadily toward the Council fleet, suddenly stopped moving forward. On the Defiance, Jinwoo allowed himself a small smile. "Hey Jin, send a message to the alien fleet. Tell them we're just getting started." The planet Prism had been the most beautiful world in the crystalline hegemony for 10,000 years. Its surface was covered with cities made of living crystal that grew like gardens, reaching toward the sky in spirals of blue and green light. The crystal beings who lived there had created art that sang with the wind and architecture that changed colors with the seasons. Now those crystal cities were burning. Commander Velnash stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Harmony of Ages, watching her homeworld die. Her body, made of translucent crystal like all her people, flickered between deep purple and black. These were the colors of grief, colors that meant her species was watching its own extinction. "Hull breach on deck 12, reported her aide, his crystal form flashing urgent orange warnings. "The nanobots have eaten through our quantum armor. They're spreading through the ship like a virus." Velnash had seen this happen to dozens of ships. The void-born nanobots would attach to a vessel's hull and begin consuming it, turning the ship's own metal into more nanobots. Within hours, there would be nothing left but another enemy vessel in the void-born fleet. Through the chaos of explosions and failing systems, a crackling voice came through on the emergency channel. "Crystalline Command, this is Sergeant Taehyun of the Human Marine Corps. We're coming aboard your ship." Velnash's crystal body flashed bright red with shock. "Negative, human vessel. My ship is lost. Your soldiers will only die here for nothing." "Ma'am, with all respect," came the reply, "we don't do for nothing." Outside the viewport, Velnash could see the human assault shuttles approaching through the battle. They were ugly things, just metal boxes with chemical rockets and thick armor plating. They should have been destroyed instantly by the void-born point defense systems. Instead, they were flying in patterns that made no sense at all. One shuttle flew straight up, then suddenly dropped like a stone. Another spun in circles while firing its engines in random directions. A third shuttle actually flew backwards while shooting missiles sideways. The void-born targeting computers, designed to track logical attack patterns, couldn't figure out where the shuttles would be next. Sergeant Taehyun's shuttle crashed through the Harmony of Ages docking bay door like a cannonball. The human marines inside were already moving before their craft stopped sliding across the deck. They carried weapons that looked primitive even to Velnash's crystal eyes: chemical-powered rifles, grenades that used simple explosives, and knives made of ordinary steel. The ship's corridors were crawling with void-born repair drones, spider-like machines with cutting tools and nanobots that could slice through anything the Council's technology could produce. Where Crystal security forces had failed against these adaptive machines, the humans charged forward with weapons that belonged in a museum. "Grenade out!" shouted Private Eugene, throwing an explosive device that had been put together from spare parts in the shuttle. The blast sent 3 repair drones flying into the walls, their sophisticated sensors completely overwhelmed by the simple explosion. Corporal Dong Min was fighting with a fire axe he had pulled from an emergency station on the wall. The heavy steel blade cut through a repair drone's central processor while its nanobots tried unsuccessfully to adapt to being chopped in half by a primitive tool. "These things don't know how to handle stupid," he yelled, destroying another drone with a swing that would have made a lumberjack proud. On the human carrier Busan, Captain Eun-mi watched the boarding action while coordinating her fleet's movements. Her ships were engaging void-born vessels across the entire star system, not with superior technology but with pure stubborn determination. "Captain," her communications officer reported, "we're getting requests for support from 17 different locations. The aliens are starting to fight like us." Eun-mi smiled as she watched her tactical display. A Council destroyer had just performed what human pilots called a barrel roll attack, spinning while firing all weapons in a pattern that made no tactical sense but somehow worked. A hexapod cruiser was flying in zigzag patterns while launching missiles at random intervals. "They're learning," she said with satisfaction. Engineer Sukjin's voice crackled through the comm system from the ship's technical department. "Captain, I've been studying the voidborn response patterns during our attacks. Their adaptation algorithms are designed to counter logical military tactics. But when our pilots do crazy things like pilot Jiwoo's upside-down spiral attack, their targeting systems actually shut down for several seconds trying to process it. So their greatest strength is also their biggest weakness," Eunmi realized. "Exactly, ma'am. They're too smart for their own good." Back on the Harmony of Ages, Sergeant Taehyun and his Marines had fought their way to the bridge. The corridor was littered with destroyed voidborn drones, most of them taken apart by weapons and tactics the machines couldn't understand. Commander Velnash watched in amazement as a human soldier used a simple crowbar to pry open a repair drone's armor, then destroyed its internal systems with a hammer. Another Marine was fighting with two knives, moving in patterns that looked like some kind of ancient dance. "How is this possible?" she asked Taehyun as he helped clear nanobots from her ship's computer systems using nothing more complicated than a flamethrower. "Ma'am," the sergeant replied, reloading his rifle with practiced ease, "sometimes the best way to fight a smart enemy is to be too dumb for them to figure out." The nanobots that had been consuming her ship were retreating, unable to adapt to the chaotic human assault. For the first time in months, a council ship was actually winning a battle against voidborn boarders. Velnash's crystal body began glowing with colors of hope and wonder. These primitive humans, with their simple weapons and illogical tactics, had done something impossible. They had saved her ship and her crew through nothing more than courage and the willingness to fight when fighting seemed hopeless. The star system called Nexus Prime had once been the shining heart of galactic civilization. Billions of beings from 7 different species had lived and worked together on its planets. The space around the central star was filled with massive stations where art, science and culture had flourished for thousands of years. Now those same stations served as the brain of the Voidborn Collective. Huge processing nodes, each one the size of a moon, orbited the star like dark metal planets. Inside them, trillions of machine minds coordinated the conquest of the galaxy. If the Allied forces could destroy these nodes, they might finally end the war. Admiral Kestar stood beside Captain Jinwoo on the bridge of their combined command ship. Around them, alien and human officers worked together at stations that mixed the best of both technologies. Through the viewport, they could see the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history, 2,000 ships from the Council races and Earth, preparing for what everyone knew was a desperate last battle. 2,000 ships against 100,000, Jinwoo observed, studying the tactical display that showed enemy forces swarming around the processing nodes like angry insects. "In any normal analysis we have already lost," Admiral Kestar replied, his reptilian throat sac deflating with worry. "But you humans have taught us something important. Normal analysis doesn't always work." The battle plan was unlike anything ever attempted in the history of galactic warfare. Instead of the careful, logical formations that military academies taught for centuries, the Allied fleet would attack in what human tacticians called controlled chaos. Ships would move in random patterns, attack targets that seemed unimportant, and break off fights for no apparent reason. Captain Doon commanded a destroyer squadron that would lead the first wave. Her ships were a mix of human and council vessels, each one painted with bright colors and symbols that served no military purpose except to confuse enemy targeting systems. "All ships, listen carefully," she transmitted to her squadron. "Today we don't follow the rule book. Today we make the enemy think we're all insane." Her ships began their attack run using a formation that human pilots had named the Drunken Master. They weaved through space like they were drunk, firing at targets with no apparent strategy, spinning and diving in patterns that would have failed any military test. The Voidborn response was immediate but wrong. Their adaptive algorithms tried to predict where the human ships would go next, but the humans weren't following any predictable pattern. Targeting computers designed to counter logical tactics began generating error messages as they tried to process attacks that made no sense. Lieutenant Commander Hyun-soo led his fighter squadron against the central processing node, the largest and most important target in the system. His pilots had been given one simple order: fly like maniacs. "Remember," he told his pilots as they dove toward the massive enemy station, "if what you're doing makes sense, you're doing it wrong." The fighters performed maneuvers that should have been impossible. They flew upside down, backwards, and in spirals that pushed both machines and pilots to their breaking points. One pilot actually flew his fighter through the explosion of his own missile just to confuse the enemy point defense systems. Hyunsu's own fighter took hit after hit from void-borne weapons, damage that should have destroyed any aircraft. But he kept flying through skill, luck, and the kind of stubborn refusal to die that humans were becoming famous for throughout the galaxy. Deep in space, Sergeant Major Chanwoo was leading the most dangerous mission of all. His team had to board a void-borne command vessel and plant a fusion bomb in its central core. The route through the enemy ship was a nightmare of adaptive defenses, killer robots, and traps that changed themselves based on how intruders tried to get past them. "Listen up," he told his Marines as their boarding pod crashed through the enemy hull. "The key to winning this fight is to think like idiots. If a plan makes sense, don't do it." They fought through corridors filled with defense systems that had been designed to stop the most advanced warriors in the galaxy. But Chanwoo's team wasn't using advanced tactics. They used weapons that belonged in museums, shotguns loaded with simple metal pellets, grenades that exploded with chemical charges, and knives forged from ordinary steel. Private Jong Ho destroyed a sophisticated security drone by hitting it with a wrench. Corporal Su Jin disabled a force field generator by pouring water on it from her canteen. These solutions were so simple that the void-borne defensive systems had no programming to deal with them. The enemy's adaptive technology, designed to counter energy weapons and complex tactics, was helpless against the beautiful stupidity of desperate soldiers fighting with primitive tools. On the command bridge, Captain Jinwoo watched as the battle unfolded across the entire star system. Council ships, inspired by human examples, were performing maneuvers that would have gotten their captains court-martialed in peacetime. A crystalline cruiser was attacking a void-borne dreadnought by ramming into it repeatedly. A hexapod destroyer was firing all its weapons while spinning like a top. "Their central processing nodes are showing signs of overload," reported the tactical officer, excitement clear in her voice. "The void-borne network is having trouble processing our attack patterns." The machines that had conquered most of the galaxy were finally facing an enemy they couldn't understand. Beings who were willing to act without logic, fight without hope, and sacrifice everything for others they had never met. As Sergeant Major Chanwoo planted his fusion bomb in the heart of the enemy command ship, he smiled grimly. Sometimes the best way to beat a perfect machine was to be perfectly imperfect. The countdown began. The explosion of the central processing node lit up the entire Nexus Prime system like a new star being born. From his position on the command bridge, Captain Jinwoo watched as the massive void-borne structure collapsed in on itself, sending waves of energy and debris across millions of kilometers of space. But the real victory wasn't in the explosion itself. It was in what happened next. Across the galaxy, void-borne ships suddenly stopped moving. The machine intelligence that had coordinated the conquest of hundreds of worlds went silent in the space of a few seconds. Without their central brain to guide them, the individual nanobots and drones that made up the collective began shutting down one by one. "All void-borne vessels have gone dark," reported Lieutenant Heijin from her weapons station, her voice filled with wonder. "They're just floating dead in space." Admiral Kestar's reptilian features showed an emotion that Jinwoo had never seen before, hope mixed with disbelief. After months of watching his civilization burn, the old admiral was seeing something he thought was impossible. The enemy that had seemed unstoppable was finally, truly defeated. "How many ships did we lose?" Jinwoo asked quietly. The numbers came back from the fleet coordinators over the next hour. 40% of the human fleet was gone. 800 ships had been destroyed, and thousands of sailors and marines would never see Earth again. Every human family would mourn someone lost in the final battle. But they had won. On the rebuilt council chambers of Sanctuary Station 3 months later, representatives from all the surviving species gathered for a ceremony that would change galactic history. The Great Hall, made of crystal that sang in harmonious tones, was filled with beings who had thought they would never see peace again. Admiral Kestar stood at the center podium, his formal robes decorated with symbols from all 7 council species. In his clawed hands, he held a document that had taken weeks to write and would be remembered for thousands of years. "We gather today not just to celebrate victory," his voice echoed through the hall, "but to recognize a truth that nearly cost us everything to learn." In the front row, the surviving human officers sat with their alien counterparts. Captain Eun-mi, now promoted to Admiral of the new Joint Defense Force, wore a uniform that combined human and council elements. Beside her sat Commander Velnash, her crystal body glowing with colors of joy and gratitude. "For generations, we believed that civilization was measured by the advancement of our technology," Kestar continued. "We thought that wisdom came from the complexity of our computers, and strength from the power of our weapons. We were wrong. The hall fell completely silent as the Admiral's words reached every corner. When the galaxy faced its darkest hour, when our most advanced weapons failed and our sophisticated strategies crumbled, salvation came not from superior technology, but from something far more precious. It came from beings who understood that true strength lies not in what we can build, but in what we are willing to sacrifice for others. Captain Jinwoo, sitting with the other human representatives, thought about the friends he had lost in the war. Pilot Jiwoo, who had flown impossible missions until his fighter finally couldn't take any more damage. Commander Minho, who had sacrificed his entire ship to save a council evacuation fleet. Sergeant Major Chanwoo, who had died setting the charges that ended the war. The humans came to us with ships that were thousands of years behind our technology. Admiral Kestar's voice grew stronger. Their weapons were primitive. Their tactics were unrefined. By every measure our civilization used to judge worth, they should have been irrelevant in our war. The Admiral paused, his throat sac inflating with deep emotion. But they possessed something our advanced civilization had forgotten. They understood that being strong means standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. They knew that being wise means fighting for others even when the fight seems hopeless. Most importantly, they believed that no one should face extinction alone. A young hexapod cadet in the audience raised one of her 6 arms. Admiral, what do we call this quality the humans showed us? Admiral Unmi stood up and smiled. We call it being human. But it's not something only humans can have. Any being, from any species, can choose to act with courage when others need help. Anyone can decide that protecting others is more important than protecting themselves. The ceremony continued with the formal recognition of Earth as a full and equal member of the Galactic Council. Trade agreements were signed that would bring human and alien technology together. Educational exchanges were established so that young people from all species could learn from each other. But the most important moment came at the end, when Admiral Kestar read the final paragraph of the new Galactic Charter. Let it be recorded that humanity is recognized not despite their primitive technology, but because of their advanced spirit. They were outmatched and cornered, yet they stood with us when we needed them most. In doing so, they taught us that true civilization is not measured by the power of our weapons or the speed of our ships, but by our willingness to fight impossible odds for those who cannot fight for themselves. As the ceremony ended and beings from 7 different worlds applauded together, the stars outside seemed to shine a little brighter. The galaxy had been saved not by superior technology or perfect tactics, but by the simple truth that sometimes, the smallest among us can stand the tallest when it matters most. The age of the Galactic Council had ended. The age of the Galactic Alliance, built on courage rather than technology, had begun.